Guys, I guess we're back for part number two. Part number two, the flames. To recap quickly, and I guess what we covered on the part number one was the causes and the preconditions that led to the rebellion and the revolution of on both sides, the American Revolution and the French Revolution. We've seen the similarities between the two movements. The best similarity was the taxation that was imposed on the former British colony of the American states, and actually the burden of the taxes under which the third estate in France was under. Okay, so naturally taxation, heavy taxation, but no political representation, no participation in the political evolution of either the British Empire or the French government, the monarchy of France at a time. So now we going to tackle part number two. So let me share my screen quickly to share with you what we're going to tackle. So if you remember, part number two is about the flames, the revolutionary flames, the deeper dive into the key events, turning points, and leadership that define each revolution, which is quite interesting. It will be a shorter section, as we'll take more time on the aftermath and the global impact. Okay, because on the aftermath, there's so many things that we need to tackle. It will be fascinating to do. Okay, so let's get on with it. Every single time we'll go into a subsection, we'll provide a title where we are, and on the editing, that's what I will do. I will make sure that you understand where we are. Okay. So now the American Revolution, from rebellion to independence. The American Revolution ignited in the spring of 1775 with the battles of Lexington and Concord. This marked the beginning of an armed conflict between the British troops and the colonial militias. Okay. Now, if you want to take a view of the key events and figures, so naturally, we can imagine that there are a number of people that we can mention that were key figures for the War of Independence or the American Revolution, depending how you want to call it. But there's naturally George Washington. So I'm focusing on three personas. There could be much more than that, but I'm focusing on three personas. So first of all, George Washington, the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. Washington leadership and resilience were instrumental to secure the end victory, okay, in 1783. Thomas Jefferson is the principal author of the Declaration of Independence, a document that articulated the philosophical underpinning of the revolution. Okay. Now, Benjamin Franklin, it's a diplomat, a scientist, and a statesman. We could stop there, but he's a fascinating individual. Benjamin Franklin was a founding father of the United States. He played a pivotal role in securing the French support for the American Revolution, not only to secure the French support, but to ensure the continuous support of the French monarchy. Okay, as the American ambassador to France from 1776 to 1785, Franklin charm, wit, and diplomatic skills captivated the Parisian society. And he was speaking French. So at a time to learn French, it was really a challenge. And he was speaking good French. His efforts were instrumental in convincing France to provide a consistent and constant military and financial support to the American colonists, ultimately leading to to the victory over Great Britain. Well, I've got to be clear, without the French, there will be no American Revolution. We have to be clear. But at the same time, as you remember in part one, I was saying that it was a mean for revenge of the French against Great Britain. So this is why they were pushing on that view of supporting the American Revolution. Now, Frankenstein in France solidified his reputation as a statesman and as a philosopher. Yes, indeed, he was contributing to all the philosophy, the philosophers' salons, and then in the coffee house, and then contributing heavily to this development of philosophical ideas. And his legacy continues to be celebrated as a symbol of American diplomacy and international support and international cooperation. But he was, really regarded as a great man, by the French Revolution. There's so many documents talking about him, talking about his influence and his capability to fuel the fire for the French Revolution. It was really, really fascinating. The War for Independence lasted 8 years, marked by significant turning points, such as the Battle of Saratoga, which secured French military assistance, and the Battle of Yorktown, where the British surrendered. So this is what I could say so far on the American Revolution when you're thinking about rebellion to independence. Now let's move on to the French Revolution. The French Revolution from Estates General to Consulate. Okay, now the French Revolution from Estates General to Consulate. The French Revolution was a more tumultuous and complex affair, characterized by rapid shifts in power and ideology. The French Revolution was a more tumultuous and complex affair, characterized by rapid shifts in power and ideology. This statement only shows the difference between the American Revolution and the French Revolution, just because the history of it, the social context is fundamentally different. So I will highlight this in the mini conclusion of the part number 2, the flame. So at the end of that section. Okay, so now let's go to the key events and figures. There's Louis XVI. Louis XVI is the ill-fated king whose inability to reform led to revolution. It's, I don't like too much the way that Louis XVI was portrayed, actually, because he only inherited of a situation that was extremely complex due to the financial strain, the extravagant way that Louis XIV and Louis XV were living, the way as well that his own wife was actually living, the kind of life standard she was using, and he was only some kind of a victim of this situation. Yes, people portrayed him as an idiot, someone that didn't have any clue about what was happening before him. At the same time, he was supposed to be the key maker. He was basically enjoying his free time to make keys. Yeah, I know it sounds strange, but that's the way he was passing his time, and it was his pleasure. And basically, he had Marie Antoinette, the Austrian-born queen, whose extravagant lifestyle symbolized the excesses of the monarchy. To give an example of that, there was the famous claim from Mirabeau when he was facing the grand master of the ceremonies of the king, when he was saying, "Well, we will not leave this place only by the power of the rifles. We only here by the will of the people." So this famous claim, and Marie Antoinette did something reversed. So people were coming to her and saying, "My queen, Majesty, people are starving in Paris. They have difficulties to put food on the table for the family and the kids. because they don't have any bread, because the base of the soup and the what people were eating was actually soup and bread, naturally. So, well, Marie Antoinette replied, they don't have any bread. They can have any brioche. So brioche is a famous kind of bread made of milk. It's a little bit sweet. It's really refined kind of a product. So obviously people didn't have the capability to pay for that. It was extremely expensive, right? For these people that was extremely poor at the limit of the survival level. So yeah, it was difficult. Now, Robespierre, a radical Jacobin leader associated with the Reign of Terror. So this is something we'll deep dive into during the part number 3, the aftermath. But actually, Robespierre was, for a time, the leader of the revolutionary process in France, and he was leading France under the Reign of Terror, where he was using the guillotine to behead a lot of people, all the political opponents, everyone that was in the way of the revolutionary process was under the guillotine. Okay, and you will be, you will see that, but you will finish under the guillotine as well. Napoleon Bonaparte, a military genius who rose to power and eventually established an empire. And this is really true because it was really military genius. It depends who you talk to. If you take in consideration the great historian Henri Guillemot, he was a French historian living in Switzerland. He was highly, he was highly a high critic of Napoleon Bonaparte. He was saying that he was a genius, but he was also someone extremely corrupted. So this will need to be, put in perspective, when they say a military genius. But nonetheless, he was really a fine political, opponent, someone that knew exactly how to drive things in politics. The revolution began with the convening of the Estates General in 1789. As I said before, to me, the storming of the Bastille, it's a consequence. It's not the turning point that is launching the revolution. The revolution starts when you have the rebellion against the king, against the authority of the king, when people were saying, we are the National Assembly and we'll never disband until we have a constitution. So naturally, this is the first moment when you have clear moment, the rebellion against the authority of the king that will turn into a revolution. Then, and the subsequent formation of the National Assembly. So the rebellion, the National Assembly, and the revolution. The storming of the Bastille on July 14th, 1789, marked a symbolic break with the old order. The Reign of Terror and the period of radical purges and execution followed. Ultimately, the revolution culminated in the establishment of the consulate, with Napoleon Bonaparte as the first consul, marking a transition from republic to authoritarian rule. So this is something that I will explain in the conclusion, in the mini conclusion of the part number 2, but this is the main difference with the American Revolution. Comparison of leadership. While both revolutions produced strong leaders, because in order to turn a rebellion into a revolution, you need strong leaders, people that really know how to lead people to the end goal. The nature of the leadership differed significantly, though. Washington was a consensus builder and a military strategist, while Napoleon was a charismatic and an authoritarian figure. But at the same time, he was a fine politician, but he was extremely corrupted morally, corrupted financially. So at all level, he was really portrayed as a bad man. And I could even say that, for example, Nostradamus was predicting, in the 15th century, he was predicted about the future and making predictions, and he was highlighting the fact that there were two antichrists, and the two antichrists were The first two Antichrist were Napoleon Bonaparte, and the second was Hitler. So for a reason. So Napoleon, with his rule, killed millions of people. So something we will explain in the part number 3. So the American Revolution emphasized civilian control of the military, and this is really the big difference. You have civilians that are controlling the revolution and the military approach, while with France, what you see is the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte means that there's a military guy that is leading to a coup d'etat. And this is a very different kind of approach. Then in that case, you don't take in consideration the civilians, you take advantage of the power that you have at your disposal. And as a result, you see corruption and everything will naturally explode. Whereas Napoleon's rise to power was naturally inextricably linked to his military successes. So we have to also to appreciate where Napoleon Bonaparte is coming from. He's really coming from the military ranks. He was he was born in Corsica and then went to Paris to become a cadet in the military academy, and then rose into the ranks of the military to become a general. And because of the lack of number of officers that were available to make the cut to the Revolutionary Wars, and then in that case he moved to the ranks extremely quickly. Okay, but that will be part 3. Will be I'm so engaged and so fascinated by this that I'm sharing too much. Okay, social context and living standards. As you can see on the table, you have the differences between the American Revolution and the French Revolution in terms of social context and living standards. But as you can see, the American Revolution was fueled by the colonist resentment of British rule and the desire for self-determination, which was already available when they were just a colony and before the 7 Years' War. Then in the 7 Years' War, as we said in the part number 1, changed everything. Okay, they felt that they were being unfairly taxed without having a say in how the money was spent. Additionally, many colonists believed that their economic opportunities were limited by British mercantilist policies. Naturally, because when you are part of a colony, you're only part of the system. You are not the system yourself. So actually, if you don't provide, you're no longer a viable part of the system. And an empire is based out of monopolies. You provide monopoly to your friend because they allowed you to become an empire. So naturally, you need to enrich these people. That's the logic of an empire. Okay. The French Revolution, and when it will turn into an empire, won't be different at all. In contrast, the French Revolution was driven by a much deeper sense of social inequality. The vast majority of the French population lived in poverty, while the aristocracy and clergy enjoyed a life of luxury. But I really mean it. Do you imagine the extreme poverty that the peasants, the people from the third estate, were living into? Not the middle class though, but the peasants, really the lower class, the lower layer of the third estate. They were living literally in poverty. I really mean it. The extreme poverty, while the other rest of the order, the clergy and the nobility, were living in lavishing luxury. It was really disgusting. Now, this resentment boiled over when the third estate, which included all non-privileged citizens, were locked out of political participation. So only they couldn't contribute to the political, advancement of the society. But there was no at all political participation at all. They were just subject of a subject and were told what to do. But as you can what you can see naturally is the social context is slightly different, because the American Revolution, colonies were burdened by taxation without representation, but the unequal distribution of wealth and limited opportunities was due to simply an empire. But on the French Revolution, what you see is a rigid class structure with an oppressive aristocracy and clergy and a struggling third estate, and widespread poverty and hunger amongst the peasantry, and high level of taxes, because all the taxes were supported by the third estate. But as you can see, you can do you can elaborate a little bit more that, you know, it is almost like a rigid class structure as well on the American Revolution, because the empire and all the people enjoying the monopoly were enriching themselves while the people in the colony were working for them. So the situation is slightly similar in that sense, right? So the same motivation were there to change the status quo. Now, economic aspects of funding. You know, to fund a revolution, and you can see the table once again, but you can see that funding a revolution cost enormous, you know, level of money. This is where you need, you know, to equip the people, to provide them food, to provide them, you know, equipment and everything. So the American Revolution was borrowing from foreign powers, mostly France. France was one of the largest contributor to the American Revolution. As well, they were issuing currency, taxation on the people, because naturally, for any human civilization, you have to remind yourself that any human civilization, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, ancient Egypt, if you provide a structure or an infrastructure of services, you have to pay taxation. But now that was the same on the French side. You needed a lot of money to fund the revolution. But in that case, they went where the money was. The confiscation of church property. The largest landowner in France was the clergy. So they were seizing the land and the properties, at the same time issuing the first paper money, the assignat. Okay. And they were receiving also foreign aid. So as you can see, the American Revolution was financed through different means, including borrowing money, issuing a paper currency like the French Revolution, and taxation. So, but throughout the war, the Continental Congress, the governing body of the rebelling colonies, they were struggling to find funds and to organize everything throughout the war. Now, the French Revolution was also financed through variety of methods, and the revolutionaries confiscated church property, as I was saying, and sold it off to generate new revenue stream. And actually, they also issued assignats. So assignats, the assignat is a form of paper currency that eventually became, useless or worthless due to inflation. Now, they were also leveraging, support from other countries. Okay, so you can see that these difference in social context, living standards, and economic realities help to explain the unique character of each revolution. But they have also similarities. The American revolutions was primarily a political struggle for independence, while the French Revolution was a more radical social and economic upheaval. As you can imagine, that the history of the two nations is fundamentally different, by which you can imagine that naturally the American colonies were enjoying self-governance before the 7 Years' War, and actually wanted to come back to it. This is why I prefer the term US War of Independence rather than using the term American Revolution, because as such, this was not a revolution. It was really an independence cry and for liberty and unlimited government and everything. While in France, it was totally different. It was really a change for 1,000 years, they were under the thumb of people and they couldn't take it anymore. Okay, now let's talk about something that is not, really pleasant for our brothers and sisters in America. But what about the Native Americans and the American Revolution? Well, the role of Native Americans in the American Revolution is often overlooked, and it's rather complex and multifaceted. You have diverse experiences. Native nations were not a monolithic entity. They were composed of different tribes with varying relationships to the colonists. They were also making alliances with the British, hoping to preserve their land and way of life against encroaching colonial settlements. The Iroquois, a confederacy, for instance, supported the British. On the other side, you had some alliances with colonists. Other tribes, such as the Delaware, the Shawnee, initially aligned with the French during the 7 Years' War, and later sided with the colonists. So they were following the French when the French were now engaging against the British Empire during the US War of Independence to counter actually the British expansion. And you had some tribes that were neutral. Many tribes attempted to stay neutral in the conflict, recognizing the potential dangers of involvement. Because if one side could win, there will be some reprisals, right? An impact of the war, regardless of the position. In reality, the war had a devastating impact on Native American populations. Many of them lost their land, suffered casualties, and faced increased pressure from both the British and the Americans. So it was not a win-win at all. It was a loss at every turn. So in many ways, the American Revolution was a continuation of the 7 Years' War, which had pitted colonists and the native allies against the French and the native allies. And the complexities of these relationships shaped the course of the revolution and its aftermath, because naturally, the losing side was always the Indians. Now, colonies, slaves, and the French Revolution. While the conditions of enslaved Africans were a critical factor in the French Revolution because of the society of the Friends of the Friends of the Blacks, the direct involvement in events leading to the uprising were actually extremely limited. They had no part in it. The Society of the Friends of the Blacks, this group of abolitionists, what I talked about during the part number 1, played a role in raising awareness of the plight of the enslaved Africans and advocating for their emancipation. Now, they reached their goal by 1794, when, if you remember, the Society of the Friends of the Blacks were founded in 1788, closed door in 1791, but the ideas that they were, propagating reached an happy conclusion in 1794 with the abolishment of the slavery. Now let's do a mini conclusion. While the American and French revolutions shared a common foundation in Enlightenment ideals for a desire for greater liberty and equality, as we saw in the part 1, the path diverged significantly. The American Revolution primarily focused on gaining independence from the British colonial rule. It was more, as I said, a US War of Independence and not really a revolution. But it resulted actually in a relatively stable and democratic process and a republic. Okay, but on the French, in contrast, the French Revolution was a system, an oppressive system for 1,000 years. So it was difficult to liberate yourself from the past memories, all the habits of people. And it was difficult because the French Revolution, driven by social and economic disparities, experienced a more tumultuous course marked by periods of violence, instability, shifting political factions. So you still have, the nobility that was part of the third estate. For example, the Marquis de Lafayette was one of the hero of the American Revolution. He was really famous for that. When he came back in France to take advantage of his position, in reality, what he wanted to do is to take the power. He wanted to take the power for himself, and he aligned himself with the third estate, but he betrayed him. So all in all I wanted to highlight there is the shifting political alliances even was something that was quite moving all the time. So this is why you see this evolution from Napoleon Bonaparte through the ranks of the military, faction. The guy was, rising himself. He was not, obviously was not a noble guy. He was coming from Corsica. And actually, this is where you can see the shifted alliances was making possible to see a guy like him to become, the Emperor of France. Okay. So despite these differences, both revolutions left a profound impact on the world, inspiring subsequent struggle for democracy, human rights, and self-determination. But this view is more importantly marked by the American Revolution. What we see in the French Revolution is something different, something a little bit darker that I will explain in part number 3, the aftermath. But thanks very much, and I will see you in part number 3. Thanks.